joining us tonight. We'll get started. Thank you so much for everyone for joining tonight's Conservation Café, the Cooling Our Cities with Real Green Roofs with William Pegues, an architect, engineer, and environmentalist who tonight will help us really open our minds about what buildings could be and how they can help mitigate the climate crisis that we're facing. I'm Renee Grebe. I'm the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate for the Audubon Naturalist Society, and we're the oldest independent environmental organization in the DC region. And we're independent because we're not part of the National Audubon Society in any way. We just serve the DC region. And here at the Audubon Naturalist Society, we enjoy, we learn, and we protect nature. And one part of our conservation program's work is to engage and encourage residents in improving our natural world. So tonight's topic of green roofs touches on how each of us can be a catalyst to help push our locales to be more forward-thinking as various development proposals are brought before our decision-making bodies like land use committees, planning commissions, boards, or city councils. So no matter where you live in the DMV, the way land is developed and redeveloped has really long-term effects on our ecology. And as we face the global climate crisis, it's really helpful to learn about what's under each of our control or what we can influence more locally. So William's talk tonight will help us see all those possibilities that we can help be advocates for in our locales as we redevelop and construct buildings. So I hope you're all as excited as I am for this conversation. Through my conversations with William, I came to learn that he was the team lead for the architectural firm that worked on the specifications for the green roofs and more at the Coast Guard headquarters over in DC at the St. Mary's campus. And actually, because of being inspired by William and talking with him, I was able to organize a tour of the facility for a small group of folks from Audubon Naturalist Society through an Admiral friend of mine. And it was absolutely incredible to see green roofs firsthand. We walked among these trees that are on the 5th floor veranda of this building. And it was amazing to then look back down onto where that veranda was that we had been standing on. Just one of the coolest things about this building I found too was that when you look at it on Google Maps, you can hardly see it because every roof is green, which is really cool when you compare it to the Joint Base on the left-hand side along the river. And as you zoom in, you can really see that every surface of that building is covered in green, including down here, the parking garage, which, as William told me, was developed like this with this kind of little bit of a curve in it because there's a bald eagle's nest just off the area here on the map. And so they had to make sure that the parking garage did not interfere with that. So that's just some inspiration that I found from William. Also tonight, feel free to talk about us on social media. You can use the hashtag Conservation Café on Twitter. And with that, I will hand it over to William.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here now. Okay, so this is me, and there's a lot of alphabet soup here. So this kind of explains a little bit of that. I'm not officially a registered architect or engineer. You have to be registered to be one of those. I write in the research for all products and materials and systems and their installation requirements for all the projects that our office would do. So something like nationwide for my total career, it's close to about 400 buildings. Some were as big as the Coast Guard headquarters, and some were smaller. The majority of them are around the Washington metropolitan area. I'm retired now, consulting as well as participating in architectural and environmental related committees. I also do a few other things. I'm a fencer, so I have another life. This is May of 2019. And because there was no event in 2020, I'm still the gold medal champion of the Canadian American Challenge for veteran-aged fencers in my age group. So today's conversation points that were pointed out is a number of kinds of issues. Most of the time, owners and developers are not really aware that they can now save costs, increase usable space, increase energy efficiency with vegetated systems. Incentives are nice, and they used to be required to get them to do these on their buildings, but they're no longer really necessary. The problem is that they don't really know what's available. So we're going to learn about terminology and explore these new systems, see where this can take us. Even in this past year, there have been changes in terminology. This sounds technical, but it isn't. It's a vocabulary of the issues. And people are really very liberal with calling something green or garden roof. They kind of all mean the same thing. So we're going to also look at different environmental friendly roofs and how they play well together, so to speak. Even in conditions where we want to harvest rainwater for cooling, like think of the cloud facility buildings that you'll see in some of the outer counties, where it's just a great big huge box of a building. Or even it could be like a large, as they call them, big box store, a Walmart or a Target, that could be using water off of the roof to use as a cooling system. So we're going to look at the future as well, because the future is really not tomorrow, it's kind of here now. Even bike rack stations, carport covers, how about buses with vegetated roofs? This stuff can be really fun, and that's not a joke. There really are buses in Europe that have vegetated roofs on them. And then again, there's urban agriculture, which is a whole new thing. First, a really strange issue is Maryland and Virginia are what's called Dillon rule states. That is, unless the state government at the state level assigns a town, a city, or a county the ability to do a certain thing or create certain rules, the county has no authority to do that, and they have to come from the state. Virginia's a little more strict, Maryland's a little more open. And the interesting thing is that because DC is a territory and not a state, and is only overseen by the Congress, they can make their own rules. So they've actually got more stringent requirements than either Virginia or Maryland has. So first off, we get in here to the terminology issue, and that is it a green roof, a vegetated roof, blue roof, reflective roof, purple roof, solar roof? It's like a rainbow of colors, as well as different things. Now, all of these terms are really correct and are commonly used. The very basic for a planted roof is to call it a vegetated roof. So here we are looking at the diagrams of some of the different types of green and blue roofs. The original blue roof, upper left-hand corner, it kind of came along in the 1980s when they started to do slow drains on the roofs. All of these things came out of cities, urban areas, because the sewer systems in cities dates back ages ago. Well, not so many big ages, but like, okay, into the early middle 1800s, when a city was being developed, stormwater and sewer were combined together, and they still are today. You would have to tear up all the streets and do everything all over again to accommodate a separate sewer and stormwater a distribution system. So what happens when it rains now, and we're getting more and more rains, is that the stormwater flushes the bacteria out of the treatment plants, and then they have to sort of like restart them. It's a big issue. So they started with slow drains and holding water on the roof. Then it came along in the bottom, the green roof, vegetated roofs, because this made the roof cooler and was just something that was a little nicer. And then blue roofs, I guess in the late 90s, began to come back again with a combination, what you call a blue-green roof, where you see water being stored underneath of it and the vegetated roof on top of it. So the other thing that happens is called reflective membranes. And these really took over in a major way because it lets you have a very lightweight roof. The problem with them now is that they reflect the light up And airplanes are finding, especially when these are near airports, that it can have a great glare problem. The problem with them when you are nearby them is that over time, and not very long, only a few months, they'll start to look, instead of like the upper picture, they'll look like the one on the lower left. You start to see the seams, you start to see the dirt, and after all, it was white, and things don't stay white in the environment very long. They even have roofs that have different standard colors, tans, greens, some blues, grays, that reflect the heat and let you get credits for having a cool roof, so to speak. But they also get dirty. And when you are in a taller building next to this and you're looking down on it, not so nice to look at. And then there's solar roofs. We all know about solar roofs. It's like solar panels, you see them. They can be on angles, they can be flat. So in the upper left is a true solar roof area. But look at the lower right picture. That green is a vegetated roof with solar panels. And this roof is actually doing multitasking because the vegetated roof actually lets the panels run cooler than under a white roof. One would think, oh, but it's all being reflected away. But what's happening is that the light comes down, and with it the heat, and it hits the white roof and it bounces back up. And the solar panels run less efficiently the hotter they get, and they run hotter when they're getting heat from both directions. The vegetated roof actually causes the solar panels to run at a much cooler temperature and be more efficient. So when we look at a vegetated roof, it's like, what is it? And this is like looking at the whole massive system for a true water retention roof now. At its simplest form, it could just be the plants, soil level of about 4 to 6 inches, and then your roofing system, membrane, insulation, whatever you may have. What has happened is that some interesting things have occurred where in the upper right-hand corner is this fabric, which as water reaches this fabric and needs to drain away, it slows the movement of the water down and even moves it in different directions based upon the weave. And so they put a honeycomb cell that you can see in the top, in the bottom picture, on top of this fabric. And that is where the water's stored, and it slowly drains into the fabric below. And then on top of that is a layer of what's called rock wool insulation, which acts as a sponge and holds water for a longer period of time. And here's an exploded version of it. Here you see the vegetation layer, the sponge layer, the water storage honeycomb cell layer, the detention fabric layer, and then below that you begin to get into the actual system of the roofing membrane, root barrier, roof membrane, whatever it may be, and then the building slab. But it really works. Integrated stormwater management. This is a concept that really needs to be understood because this is what really makes it worthwhile. So we take all of these different systems and we put them all together, and we ended up with a good stormwater management system where you don't need to have stormwater retention ponds or massive tanks in the basement of a building that holds the stormwater. And now cities around the country, New York and Denver were the ones that led the way. DC has a very similar. The roofs on a building over a certain size must either be vegetated roof, solar roof, or a combination of the two. And now we'll do a little bit of a wayback machine. We go back to 2010 and that Coast Guard project. This is looking at it from a different angle. At this time, 2010, this was the second largest vegetated roof in the country. But all of the stormwater control was done by the stormwater retention pond that you see at the bottom. The roof could provide no value because there were no tests. There were no studies that had been done that says, well, how much water can these roofs retain or detain? And basically, no one had ever bothered to do a test for them. So over time, a couple of groups of people got together, different membrane manufacturers, different soil engineers, and created a way to do testing, and set up a group in Culpeper, Virginia, where they actually have a testing laboratory that they built up where they can do simulated storms, measure the water, and now they can actually tell how much efficiency a certain type of roof will have. And so now, if this project was being done, you likely would see no lake at the bottom of the hill. And of course, we have what is happening with things these days. And these days, we're getting a little more rain than we used to get. This is looking off of my back deck. Though all of this water comes from only 2 catch basins on the Reston Parkway. It only happens when it rains really heavy. Otherwise, you don't see this at all. But all of that debris back there are trees that fell within the last 7 to 8 years. I've lived in this same house since 1993, and this was a dense forest all the way across. You didn't see any downed trees at all. But because of all of this water, it's not just erosion. Yeah, there was a lot of erosion involved here as well, but it's that the trees can't live with this water, especially oak trees. The majority of the trees that fell were oaks. So that's what happens with these more frequent rains, where everything is typically designed on a 10-year, 24-hour event storm. But we're seeing the 50-year storm maybe a couple times a year. So we see a lot of water. And so one of the things that has happened is that people are looking very significantly at rain gardens. And rain gardens can be very beneficial. It's a very old concept, and it's really regaining ground. One of the things that's a real problem with rain gardens is that many people are bypassing the slotted drain pipe, and they'll just take their downspouts and put plastic pipe on it and run it underground to send the water somewhere else, maybe even into the street. What it is that with a true rain garden, you want slots in the bottom of the pipe so that the water can disperse before it gets to the street, and it recharges the groundwater, or you can create a true garden over top of it. The intent is not to move the water elsewhere. It's to deal with it locally, make it useful. And then again, rain gardens can lead to retention ponds. Unfortunately, a lot of times retention ponds end up more like retention swamps. Obviously, this is an exaggeration here, but remember that Coast Guard project. Then think about all those housing developments that you see gathered around retention and detention ponds. They take up enormous amounts of space. They're hazardous to children. They often are stagnant breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So these big ponds are something that we can actually now get rid of. So here in DC, this is not a picture of DC, but it's what is being done. The steep hills that lead down into Rock Creek Park, the water would simply go down the street. Some of these hills are really very steep, and it would get to look like it was a running river. And so it was going down these hills and then into the Rock Creek Park stream, and causing a massive amounts of erosion. So what they've done is that where they had trees and tree wells, they started to create these rain gardens. And you can see in this picture here, in the right side of it, that square that seems to be protruding into the rain garden, that's actually an inlet from the curb cut, where the water would run down the curb. So the water comes down the street gets to one of these cuts and goes into the rain garden. Now, underground, these rain gardens are all connected with each other. So if they fill up, they can flow to the next one and take its time before it gets all the way to the bottom of the hill, so that by the time it gets to the park, it's going slower. A huge volume of water is stored in these tanks that slowly dissipates over time, as opposed to, rushing down the hill into the park with massive amounts of erosion. So let's take this to the next level. This is New York City. This is a rain garden with the same kind of principle Rock Creek Park has. They've got thousands of these installed, and now they've worked so successfully, they're installing thousands more. So what happens on a block is that they have these nice rain gardens, and you can see the curb cut where the water that would be running in the curb drains right into this rain garden. And if it fills up, the one next to it or the one up the street from it, it's connected. And then they slowly fill a big tank down below the rain garden, which will let the water be used by the plants above, as well as store the overburden of water to slowly drain over time. That way it saves the sewage treatment plants, because still all of this water has to go through the sewage plant because of the combined sewer systems. So if we look simply at vegetated roofs and what they can do, there's a lot of myths that are out there. You can't put them on slope roofs, you can't put them on a wood deck, you can't put them on residences. It's like, but wait, what? Here's some single family home, upper left or upper right and lower picture. And on the all of these, you see a sloped roof. And on all of these, they all happen to be on a wood deck. So it's like, no, you can do all of these just fine. What happens over time? Nothing. The plants grow fine. There's a special system that lets you, actually, you can do a totally vertical green roof system. So a lot of these myths are really crazy. I don't know why people keep thinking that. I mean, I encounter this, and I'm on the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee, and we encounter this from developers all the time. We say, oh no, we can't put that. That's a wood roof deck, and you can't do that. It's like, well, no, you can. So this particular project here is an apartment complex in Michigan, and it's done in the very standard way that typical apartments that are 3 to 5 stories tall are done nowadays, like the things that you see going on in around the Reston Station areas and other 3 to 5 story buildings. What it is that the first floor is basically a concrete slab on the ground, a concrete slab overhead, and concrete that holds up this first floor, and it's retail. Above that, it's called stick built, which basically it's a lot of 2x4s, vertical studs, vertical studs and joists, and they have maybe it's plywood backing, whatever, and they'll have a plywood deck. That's what this is here. It's very standard construction, nothing new, and they have a vegetated roof on top of these areas. You know, you have a nice usable space. You can see how some of these have become deck areas. Some are simply vegetated areas. The tops of the ones that stick up taller, those are basically like the stairwells that go up to that level to let you out onto your terrace. And it all works just fine. So these are apartments in Michigan. This is on the upper left is native plants integrated into a vegetated roof. And this is up in it's an insurance company that's in Illinois. On the right is from England. That's all large plants. And basically on both of these, this is like a 6 to 8 inch deep soil area. That's all. And these plants are growing very fine in this environment. The building on the right is actually dates from like the 1990s. So then there's farming. And also this brings up another urban myth, is that you can't do this with an existing building. So if we look at the upper left-hand picture and the upper right-hand picture, this is the same building. It's an old building that dates from the 30s. It's in Brooklyn, and the development area is called the Brooklyn Grange. And it's two buildings. The building at the top, I'm showing, this is what it used to look like on the left. And then after it was refurbished, it's a farm on the right. And that is a true agricultural farm. In the foreground is the second building, which is a slightly larger and more square-shaped building. And you can see the vegetation growing in it. So here, we're looking at the largest farm in the Middle Atlantic region that's on a roof. Note all the penetrations, all the equipment pads, elevator, machine rooms, vents. This is not a problem because all the farming is done by hand. You don't put tractors on a roof. In fact, the interesting thing with the one on the bottom is that they have events there. They hold weddings there. It's an interesting thing to see. You look and see all of the activity that's happening with the farm. And curiously enough, the building that is on the bottom is a multi-level mall now. And all of the restaurants that are in the mall get their food that they serve that are vegetables from the roof farm. This is an interesting situation that is happening more and more in urban areas. This is one of my projects that I did, and it's in Bethesda, Maryland, in the Pike and Rose area. This was an apartment building, and I actually was giving a similar presentation to my office in DC, and I asked if anyone knew if any of the WDG projects had a farm on the roof, and no one knew. Well, what happens is that this was a residential building, an apartment building, and it originally had a standard sedum green roof, and it had two levels of heights, one the lower level roof, and then the building went up higher above on one side. And so the owner had put a vegetated roof on it because simply he wanted to have something that looked nicer than looking down on a ugly roof. And so you could look down on something that was green and growing, but it was nothing special. So a couple of years pass and more development occurs there, and there are more apartment buildings, and then retail comes along. And because there's office buildings and apartment buildings, a lot of restaurants appear within the sort of like 4 or 5 block radius. And an urban farming company comes along and says, we'd like to lease your roof, and we'll take over all the maintenance, all the water costs, and we'll pay you a leasing fee. And because we're going to use all this produce that we grow and sell it to the local restaurants and even to your residents. And that's what they did. The company is called Uptop Acres. And again, it was about 3 years after the building was completed, the developer was approached independently. And it's like, now what can you do? It's like, think if you lived here, or and you had kids, and you look down and you say, wow, what are they farming today? You can actually see the farming activity occurring. And it's like, as you look out your window, which is like, yeah, green was good, but now it's green and growing, and it's being harvested, it's being planted, a lot of interesting things happen. And it doesn't just happen on a residential building. This is 1015 Half Street, another one of my projects. No one knew it had happened to it. This was like 5 years after it was up. This building is just a few blocks from the Washington Nationals Stadium. It's an office building, and it has an area that had a green vegetated roof on it and an amenity space beside it. So now people can come out on the roof, and if they're at a fitness center or whatever, they're looking out here. It may just be growing, or you may be seeing harvesting activities going on, or planting activities going on, or just day-to-day weeding and cultivating. So it's a very interesting thing that happens. This is a stadium, California, Levi's Stadium, which is the stadium for the Oakland Raiders. I think it's the Oakland Raiders. But anyway, all of the food growing on this particular stadium roof is used by their restaurant venues inside the stadium. So they're producing all of their food or their vegetable crops anyway, being used inside the stadium, and obviously very fresh. This is Thammasat University in Bangkok, Thailand. This building is a huge building, and they're only seeing like 1/4 of it. It is currently the largest vegetated roof that's an urban farm in Asia. The entire roof is an educational farm. It's a community farm for local use. People can lease little spaces to grow food for, like a shared garden space. And the interesting thing that they do is that they require everything to be done totally organic. And so they actually teach classes to the people who lease the space. And then the people can, they learn the correct ways to do organic farming, and then they can grow their crops there. So there's a little short video here that I'm going to show.
Thammasat University has introduced an adaptive climate solution with Asia's largest organic rooftop farm, the Thammasat University Rooftop Farm, or TURF. Designed by Land Process, the $31 million TURF incorporates sustainable food production, renewable energy, organic waste, water management, and public space within its 22,000 square meters. A century ago, King Rama V created the Rangsit rice plantations and a vast network of canals here, but it was paved over as Bangkok expanded. Integrating landscape architecture with the ingenuity of traditional rice terraces, the rooftop farm is an excellent example of cultural adaptation and reuse. Carving to the mountainous architecture, TURF maximizes the terrain to create multifunctional public spaces. Employing modern green roof technology, diverse cascading plantations mitigate flood risk while growing food to feed the community. Located at the main axis of the campus, the H-shaped architecture stands for humanity, divided into 4 equally accessible sections representing a core element of democracy: people, liberty, equality, and fraternity. At the ground entrance, a terrace amphitheater welcomes everyone, and a large sky amphitheater rewards those who climb to the top, offering 360-degree panoramic view of Bangkok. As rainwater zigzags down the slopes, each level of turf harvests runoff, forming unique micro-watersheds. At the end of its journey, 4 retention ponds at each wing mitigate and store excessive rainfall, capable of holding up to almost 3.1 million gallons of water once combined. And the roof is equipped with solar panels which can produce up to 500,000 watts per hour to irrigate the urban farm from the retaining ponds and power the building beneath it. TURF grows more than 40 edible species, including rice, indigenous vegetables and herbs, and fruit trees. Up to 20 tons or 80,000 meals of organic food are produced each year. TURF provides a platform to learn and share across various disciplines, and 12 individually designed areas on the slopes serve as oval-shaped outdoor classrooms. Through year-round workshops on sustainable agriculture, it leaves newfound knowledge for 40,000 campus residents and the surrounding community to use at home. Lessons on Thai agriculture, landscape, and native soil are embedded into the 1.7-acre Thammasat University Urban Rooftop Farm, educating future leaders to adapt and embrace climate challenges by building sustainable cities for generations to come.
For more information about this project and many more, explore the International Green Roof and Green Wall Projects database at greenroofs.com and join our mailing list so you don't miss out on any of the Green Roof and Green Wall news and upcoming projects of the week.
Okay, so that whole roof that you saw there is catching all of the water that falls on it and storing all of it so that it doesn't run off into the city. They use it for cooling, they use it for irrigation, and they grow all that produce. So that's how vegetation grows on the roof and how it can be used in a number of different ways. So now we're going to talk a little bit about solar, because that's the other big thing, how to provide power. And it's like, you get all of this roof space, and it's obviously it's up in the air. So there's not, on the taller buildings, there's no shadows on it. It's a good clear area for it. But people always say, well, you can't grow plants underneath all of those solar panels. Well, actually you can. There are many plants that grow well in the shade. Even native plants. This is a picture of a rooftop in England, and these are all native plants to their area, and they're all growing fine under the solar panels. I used to include a little funny picture after this, which showed someone having chosen the wrong plants, and it was a lot of tall plants that grew up above the solar panels and were shading them. So you do have to make sure you choose the right plant, because some plants grow tall. They don't have to, though. There's a lot of variety you can choose from. So one of the things we see in the future is that anything you can put a roof on, you can put vegetation on it as well. You can even do sculptured roofs. This is the Kennedy Center's new area called the Reach. You see it if you cross the Roosevelt Bridge going from Virginia into DC, and this starts off like you see in the lower left, as a flat area of the roof and a huge area that's all around it where people can go out onto the roof and have cocktails or whatever, or they can have outside programs. And you see that it twists and elevates until it is totally vertical as a wall. The upper left picture is showing how the grid is created that holds the soil in place. And the far right next to the ladder of that picture on the upper left, you can see the soil having been placed into those. This has now undergone 2 winters and 1 summer in place, and is starting its 2nd summer. This is the Martin Luther King Library, downtown DC. This building has been there for a long time. They were thinking of tearing it down. One of the reasons they didn't is that it's the only building built by the famous architect Mies, and he had a standard roof on it. But it was the only one that was built by him in the city. So it was designated as a historic building. So they really then couldn't tear it down. So they decided to totally renovate it. And when they did so, they turned the roof into a vegetated roof and a combined roof area where you can go out and sit in amongst all these little garden spaces. So yeah, here's a historic existing building that now has a wonderful vegetated roof on the top of it. But there are things that individuals can do. This happens to be a shed area, but it could be a carport. It could be a gazebo. It could be just simply as it is, an outdoor shed. They make trays where the whole vegetation package is in a tray that's maybe 3 or 4 inches thick, and it comes with the vegetation, and you sort of like just plop it down. Of course, you can be more exotic, and then you can stick plugs of other kinds of plants into it. But you can get these trays and create your own vegetated roof system, carport covers, whatever. This is Columbus, Ohio. This is a bike rack. This isn't something new. This bike rack was actually in place in, something like about 2009, 2010. They started doing this with bike stations around the city, and they have several hundred of them. And as old ones of original design that didn't have a cover over them as they've been replacing them or adding new ones, they add this one here. This is one of their older original ones. This picture I took like about 3 years ago when I was last there, of this bike rack, which at this time would be about 10 years old. So it's holding up well as a nice bike rack and cover, and the vegetation is doing very well. And you can see that's not very thick. That's like 6 inches deep on that little roof there. And so it's turning essentially what would be that sidewalk down below into a rainwater absorptive space. In Europe, they do a lot of interesting things. Holland is really kind of the big lead on a lot of these, because for one, they need to control water in a major kind of way because most of the land is below sea level. So they have buses with vegetated roofs on them. In the upper right-hand corner, yeah, that's a barge. And because it's so cool, meaning that it's literally making it cooler, because the roof is very thin, has very little insulation in it. I mean, after all, we're trying to save weight. It's a boat. They put this vegetation on it, and the whole space inside is a lot cooler. And bus shelters. Here's a bus shelter in the lower right that has a vegetated roof on it. So what they're doing now in Europe is something that they're thinking about here. This is actually a package that you can get now, as you know, when you're designing your building, developer, architect, whatever, he can get a package that is called a habitat package. So it has logs in it, it has sanded areas in it, gravel areas, so that it's not just that it's vegetation, or not just that it's plants for pollinators and whatnot. It's an entire habitat for them. So this is moving beyond just stormwater retention. Now it's encouraging and the proliferation of pollinators and their habitat from birth to being pollinators, the whole life cycle. And it's also integrated with vegetated wall systems. This is not, on the right, a ground level view. This is 7 floors up in the air. And here's the German embassy in Washington, D.C. with just a vegetated wall. And one is a winter on the right, and one is the summer on the left. This now has gone through several winters and summers. So they have 3 outside stair towers. Don't ask me why they go outside to go from level to level, but that's the way it was designed. And it originally didn't have a vegetated wall. It was just like a metal lattice that you could actually see through. Then they decided they wanted to have more vegetation and a little more privacy in their stairwell. So this vegetated wall was built, and it shows you how you can really do this kind of thing in a major way. This is a very high-tech wall because it wakes plants up. It when it gets warm, plants want to draw water, and so that's not necessarily spring. It might be the middle of winter, The whole system will drain and recharge itself with water. It'll measure the nutrients that are in the absorptive material that the plants were rooted in. And if they need food, it will give them more nourishment. If it has a problem where it has an emergency where something doesn't drain when it needs to, or they're running out of something, it will actually phone you on a text message and tell you that there's a problem, or set a little buzzer off in the office if it's during normal office hours. So you can actually see this on Reservoir Road. It's on the uphill side. If you're going into town, it's on the left side at the German embassy. And this is an interesting situation here. It's a one-room hair salon. This is a reaction to the COVID epidemic that we've had. This was a hair salon person. He owned the salon, but of course, when COVID came along, he could no longer have his shop open. The shops were all closed. So he looked at the requirements, and they were that if you could open the windows up on two sides and have a big opening and on the third side, it qualified as a quote outdoor space. So he had built this little one-room small salon that has, you know, one chair in it. He can have one person there at a time, and he put a vegetated roof on it because this was the beginning of the summer for him at that time when when the COVID problem started. It was March. And so as restrictions went across the summer, they needed to have some sort of cooling system for it. Well, vegetated roofs do a fantastic job in cooling. So he has no equipment out there. He has no air conditioning system, no single air conditioning unit. They didn't want fans blowing around. And all his cooling is provided by this little vegetated roof. Kind of neat. And the last thing here is, this is like probably the most technical part of the discussion. And it's the last thing, but it's a really important thing, because this is an actual test experiment. A black roof on the far left is, and to let you know, basically, this is a single panel that was put out in the sun on a day when the air temperature was 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was a sunny, cloudless day. On the left side is a black roof, 72-degree air temperature. The roof is 128 degrees. The white roof, this is supposed to be the cool roof. It's 110 degrees. A gravel surface roof is actually cooler. It's 100. And then there is a vegetated roof that is starting from a plug type. And even that's a lot lower because there's soil involved with that. So it's 89 degrees. But the vegetated roof, because the vegetation only being little sedum plants in this design, that's basically 3 to 6 inches tall, shades the soil. And so the soil level below the plants, which is the beginning of the roofing system, is 71 degrees, 1 degree cooler than the actual air temperature. So if we think back to those big buildings that are like the cloud facilities, what do they want to do with they're trying to do a white roof and harvest the water. So you can still harvest the water. And guess what? The vegetated roof does filtering for you. So they have to take that water that comes off the white roof and filter it to get all the dirt that ultimately has accumulated on the roof back out of it, where the vegetated roof does a lot of the filtering for you. And you get about the same amount of water. 80% of the water would still be able to be harvested and stored. And now with that water, well, look, you used to be trying to cool your roof from 128 degrees on a very cool day in the summer down to whatever you needed to have the inside. But now, hey, the roof is already cooler than you're ever going to get that inside temperature. Remember, these buildings are filled up with computers that are giving off huge amounts of heat. And if it can be that efficient for them, think what it can do for any other building. So those buildings which get denser medium put on it, especially the ones that go over to agricultural uses, there's a lot of potential savings. You could have a smaller air conditioning system for the whole building. You could have lower insulation values, or stay with the same insulation value and have then again even smaller air conditioning and heating systems. So this is something that you can go out there and tell people about how you can be very efficient to incorporate vegetated roofs. So, oh, here's what happened in Canada anyway, as we come to the end here. I did win the gold medal, and for the teams, I also won a bronze medal. But don't forget, in closing, you have to be kind to plants, because in reality, plants are farming us by giving us oxygen daily until we eventually decompose and they can consume us. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, William. We do have one question for you in the Q&A. And if you have any other questions, please just drop them in the Q&A and we can surface them for William. This question comes from Cindy Spees. William, have you been involved with a roof and building projects that include shade trees to reduce the building's heat? I believe I saw some trees in the Coast Guard photos. Are they more challenging than agricultural use projects?
Yeah, because for one, you have a much more intensive root issue. So in that, you usually have to do with true planters, where you're giving a couple of feet of soil for where the tree is. Now, we had on the actual rooftop of the Coast Guard, they had some areas which went to 3 or 4 feet thick, in sort of like rolling hills kind of thing. And they used bigger bushes there, but they didn't put any trees on the actual true roofs. When you got to the plaza areas, because the structure was different down there, the roofs tend to be lighter in construction than a plaza, they were able to put, 3 or 4 feet of cover over the whole thing, and then they planted trees there. But yeah, there have been some projects where instead of a vegetated roof, they had really true deep planters and they put trees on them.
That's great, thank you. How long will the roofing material last?
Well, that's another thing that's interesting. Because it's being kept cooler, it's not exposed to light. It's turning out that most of the membranes are doubling their lifespan. So some of the ones that are the fluid applied type roofing systems, they used to come out with a 20-year warranty. They're now giving a 30-year warranty. And now they will actually, a couple of them, the leaders of this kind of thing that have been doing vegetated roofs this entire time, they will actually come back at the termination of your warranty, do an inspection for you, say, okay, well, maybe some insulation needs to be replaced, or some of the details where you have flashing and integration needs to be repaired or replaced. And then we'll do that, and then we'll give you another 30 years. So they're seeing that these roofs, after they get to be about 3 years old, just don't age anymore, because they're not exposed, they're not suffering heat trauma, and they're not getting UV degradation.
That's really interesting. I will say that as we did the tour of the Coast Guard headquarters, the one caveat they gave for that building specifically was that they connected those green roofs to the ground so that you could walk up and have access to that building. And the problem they had there, which shouldn't happen on most green roofs, was that deer came up and ate some of the plants. And groundhogs came up and dug their burrows into the roof, affecting the mesh. But that's very specific to that building. That's a funny story.
Right. Yeah. It's like the root barrier, as it's called, is meant to be a barrier to roots, not to rodents.
Yes, yes. And then Sergio also asked, how difficult is it to DIY your own roof or DIY your own roof?
Well, it depends upon what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do your own residence, it's like, well, do you really want to go out there and do your own shingles? The answer to that is probably no. So basically, if you're doing the roof over what I would call occupied or a livable space, you would really want that to be done professionally, so that they could, there's a lot of stuff to do there. Yeah, you can build your own house. My father did. But then again, it's not something that I would recommend someone to do unless they just simply really wanted to do it. But if you're talking about, oh, look what I can do with a car shed, or I've got a little trellis thing outside in the back and I want to turn it into a gazebo or whatever, yeah, you can do that.
Do you have any tips for doing that?
My tips would be is that you would get a good membrane that is like one of these sheet membranes as opposed to shingles, and it can be a roof or have a very low slope to it, like you would do on a gazebo, say, and then use one of the tray systems where if you go out like that particular video, which had the Green Roofs organization, you can go to their website and they reference a number of different growers. The biggest grower in the country or in the world is called Semper Green, and their US headquarters is in Culpeper, Virginia. And down there they have acres and acres and acres growing. They grow professionally for other people, for wholesalers, for roofers. In fact, Semper Green did the Coast Guard project. They make a tray system, and you can learn about how tray systems are made. There's a couple of different ways, but basically it's a plastic tray that's basically about 2 feet by 2 feet, and it's got the soil in it, the right kind of soil, and then it's growing sedums. But you need to be a little bit thicker, like a 4 to 6 inch deep tray, if you're going to plant some of the natives or include natives into it.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from Cindy. Have you encountered any research on rock wool manufacturing pollutants? And are there other options available?
Okay, here's the thing. There's one manufacturer currently in the world that is making this product. It's called Rockfon. And that company uses none of the formaldehydes or none of the binders. It is simply pure rock wool that has no extra chemicals in it at all. And they use a needle punch system to help hold it together. And so all of the rock wool that appears on vegetated roofs is typically this product. It's they make it here in the US and in Europe. And there's some other manufacturers that have been looking at it, but it's still sort of like in its infancy in terms of quantity. So the other rock wool manufacturers in this country are still not making it yet. Actually, the manufacturer that's making it is Knauf, Knauf, I believe is the way they spell their name. And it's a European company, but they have factories here and in Europe. And that product is what is used in vegetated roofs. So there's no worry about that. It's like a lot of them have used formaldehydes in there as a binder to help hold the fibers together. But that's not used in vegetated roofs.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions we have in the Q&A. I had a question for you. How do we advocate to our locales for these? What can you provide examples and a list for us to be able to reference from your presentation, or are there specific types of arguments that you found are more compelling for elected officials to take action on actually doing some implementing and requiring some of these things?
Well, there's, at a sort of a real intense level, there's going to things like planning and zoning committee meetings. Those for any jurisdictions are typically posted publicly. It's trying to find out where they're posted, or find out that the organization actually exists, or a supervisors meeting where they're supposedly approving the various projects or whatnot. Typically, it's the planning and zoning committee meetings where they're getting asked about these kinds of issues. When it's gone to the board of supervisors of a county, it's typically already been through all of the qualifications and nobody wants to change anything. But the big thing is as I put out here was a lot of information about what's happening that's new. And it's only been like in the past 3, well, maybe 4 years now, that you've been able to actually use calculations from the roof to say, okay, this isn't going to cost me something that I'm going to gain money back over time. This is something where it can be a true upfront cost savings issue right now. It can cost less to do a vegetated roof that's water retention than to do the cheapest white roof. Because with the cheapest white roof, you either have to build that big reservoir out in front of the building or have a massive storage water retention tank somewhere on site. And it has to filter it because all the water is still going to go back into the outflow system in the streams. So now, in addition to that, you get all that extra space. Yeah, instead of being a lake that can become a hazard or a swamp, or this massive stormwater retention tank that's in the basement of a downtown building or even on the site of a building in the suburbs, you didn't have to do that. It's gone. Now you have more space in the building, leasable space. And then in addition, hey, if you're going to attract a farming unit to come and build a farm on top of it, hey, he's going to pay you rent. He's going to rent your roof. That never happens in the past. So those are the things to talk about. And it's just finding the local meetings, or if you happen to meet somebody, it's like, bring the topic up and see, because the big thing is that developers still don't know this is real. They go, what, really? It's happening? In the Rest in Planning and Zoning Committee meeting the other day, we had one coming before us, and I said, so what are you doing with your roof there? I mean, you've got a lot of huge flat area. And he said, well, we're looking at some solar panels and we're going to do some, vegetated roof for the whole thing. And I said, have you guys thought about farming? He said, no. And with a big sort of like surprised look on his face. I said, well, you have a building downtown in Washington, D.C. that is doing this. It's one of your own, it's not, he wasn't the project manager for that building. He didn't know about it. But their company, the big companies, Boston Properties actually, has a building downtown that has an urban farm on the top of it that is doing more than just growing produce and selling it. They're actually a partnership with the urban farm company, the developer, and a charitable organization that distributes food produce to needy families. They actually distribute to multiple organizations that then distribute the food to shelters and needy families. And so his whole roof is a charitable organization.
I love the intersection of addressing cooling our planet, climate change, food insecurity, and stormwater management. It's just a win all around to tackle so many issues.
Right. And that's the thing too, is that if you're involved with something that is doing urban agriculture, every time I meet with a group that's talking about urban agriculture, it's always, well, there's so little space in the cities, we need to reserve more and more of it. And I say, well, instead of looking down at the ground, look up at the sky. Look at all those roofs, all that flat area. Every one of them could be a farm, whether it's producing food that they're selling to the residents of the building or to local restaurants, or they're working with organizations to distribute to the needy. It's there.
That's great. William, thank you so much for your time. Let's see, we have one question that just came in. Is there an organization or association where you can learn about products that do the installation?
that do the installation. Yes, there is. And there is a organization called Purple Roofs. You got to be careful when you put that in. Because it will also turn up with something that we would say is a little bit salacious. But I'm not sure of what their actual website address is, but if you put in a search for Purple Roof installations and Google and word it that way, you're likely to get the roof people than the other people. But they have a tremendous number of blogs and short 3-4 minute videos that show different roof systems, how the whole thing goes together, how they test it, how the stormwater retention works. And the other thing is that you can also go and search for, I think they're Up Top Acres. That's the agricultural people that do most of the farming. They have something like, I think 9 farms on roofs downtown DC.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for those resources. We don't have any more questions in the Q&A. So William, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for your inspiration. This topic really blew my mind away, and I hope it's really inspired everybody else to think about what we really can be doing, what we can be encouraging our locales to do to help to keep up with this pace of really exciting change.
Yes, a lot of things going on.
So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And we really appreciate your time, William. Thank you so much.
Thank you.